I'm crazy the way you love me. Crazy. Been so long. Why you keeping me waiting? Been so long. Why you keeping me waiting? All you wanna send it out on you, baby.
Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply. It's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. This is a really important show. Many of you heard my rant on Instagram and Facebook that the only thing in science that supports improving human lifespan and health span is the noble acquisition of strength and muscle. Nothing else. There's no other studies out there that show rapamycin makes people live longer, or peptides make people live longer, or any of the magic beans promoted by different companies today who are going to tell you that NMN, the FDA just took NMN off the market. They're going to make it a pharmaceutical drug. Who cares? People all up. Who cares? These things don't have any research on them that proves that they make humans live longer. They have research on them that they do these certain things and adjust these certain markers that we associate with longevity, but there's no human studies. The only human studies out there that support something that actually makes people live longer and healthier is how much lean body mass you carry and how much strength you carry. In women up to 60 and men up to 65, the more strength and the more muscle you carry, the longer you're going to live without disease. This has been proven in humans, not C. elegans, not yeast, not fruit flies, in humans. So at the top of your list of improving your lifespan and health span should be things that help you legitimately build muscle. And I think I can say with complete honesty that blood flow restriction training is more effective than anabolic steroids. I say that because I've used lots of anabolic steroids for decades, but nothing has changed my body faster than blood flow restriction. So if you do believe that the science that shows linkage between increased lean body mass and strength is going to improve your chances of living longer and being healthier, pay attention to this show, because this show is going to teach you how to do it. And I say easily for a reason, and we're going to talk about that more in just a second. I have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods, makers of the tasty pastry, an upgraded Pop-Tart that tastes like real pastry, less than 1 gram of sugar, 4 to 5 net carbs, 20 grams of high-quality dairy protein, and now their new sweet roll, which we will have a banner here very shortly. The sweet rolls, if you've ever stopped at the airport and at a Cinnabon, and you know how delicious those are, well, Ron Penna and his team over at Legendary Foods has now made a healthy version of a Cinnabon that actually tastes better than a Cinnabon, and they have a cinnamon flavor that's covered with icing. They have a chocolate flavor covered with chocolate icing and a berry flavor. They are unbelievable. You will really think you're eating crap. But once again, 20 grams of high quality protein, 4 to 5 net carbs, less than 1 gram of sugar. They did it again. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary. Use the code SHR10 to buy them. And you'll also be letting them know that you learned about them here on Superhuman Radio. Now, the secret to building muscle effortlessly, and I say that effortlessly because there's a reason. We are joined today by Sten Stray-Gundersen and Peter why am I gonna? I know how to say it. Cichonski, right?
Cichonski.
Cichonski. I'm sorry. And we went over this before the show. That just goes to show you how. Anyway, welcome to the show, guys. We're going to be talking about something that we actually talked about on this show in 2007, which was originally called Katsu. Some Japanese scientists discovered that when you congested the muscle by causing blood flow restriction, that muscle did some amazing things. It grew faster. It was originally designed for injury recovery, right? Right, Sten?
Yeah, and actually, if we could kind of go into the brief history of how this kind of emerged, I think that helps frame the idea and kind of the methodology behind it. So a guy by the name of Dr. Sato in Japan was in the typical traditional seiza position for a funeral he was attending. And basically, he was in that position. He was also a bodybuilder, and he noticed he got a similar pump in his calves that he did when he was in the gym getting a nice pump. And this started the idea that, wait, there might be something to restricting blood and inducing this muscle hypertrophy, at least acutely. Well, fast forward a few months later, he was kind of experimenting. He was actually skiing and had a malleolar fracture in his ankle. Now, at the time they would put people in a full leg cast where you had basically no mobility. And the big caveat or the big detriment there is the limbs atrophies like crazy. Well, he at the time was experimenting with this stuff with, things like knee wraps and bicycle tubes and things like that. And he actually showed a significant attenuation of the atrophy that they'd normally expect. In fact, they actually had to replace his cast. Normally they take it off at like 6 weeks to get a smaller cast, and there was no change in the size of the cast that he was using. So this kind of prompted him to really start looking at this, using different materials. And actually he was using, like I said, bicycle inner tubes, things like that. Ended up giving himself a pulmonary embolism because he was occluding his arteries at certain times. So, he was kind of his own guinea pig and ended up figuring out a way to do this in a safe way. And that's kind of how Katsu initially emerged, which, by the way, in Japanese means additional pressure. So the idea is you're placing this additional pressure on the vasculature, on the limb of interest, and inducing these hypertrophic gains by doing that.
So let's dig a little bit deeper in that. There's some certain cascade of events that occur when you congest the muscle. And we've always chased the pump. We take supplements, arginine and alpha ketoglutarate. All these supplements we take specifically to increase muscle congestion and the pump. These basically do it mechanically. But there's a cascade of intramuscular events that take place when you congest the muscle, whether it's by taking a supplement or doing it more efficiently with a BFR band. Talk about that.
Yeah. So again, it's a multi-pronged approach. So you are congesting the muscle. You're causing blood pooling via a venous restriction of blood flow. And in the process of that, you're creating more mechanical tension, actual tension on the muscle by perfusing it with blood. You're also changing the osmolarity of the muscle. So more water goes into the muscle, causing swelling. And then there's, like you mentioned, there's some intracellular, and then there's some also systemic effects that occur from the fatigue signal that you're eliciting as well. So there's both local, and I know it's a little bit controversial, but likely some systemic effects, some systemic hormonal effects that you would achieve with regular high intensity exercise that you're doing with BFR. Now, to speak on the mechanical constriction, again, there's nothing quite like a BFR pump. That what we're kind of going for in the gym when we're doing sort of a high volume kind of, you can think about it like as a drop set or something similar. You're basically just trying to perfuse that muscle with as much blood as you possibly can in a short amount of time for an acute effect. But basically this venous occlusion or intermittent venous occlusion allows that process to occur a little bit more rapidly, and in my opinion, a little bit to a greater magnitude as well.
So how do I know I'm just occluding veins and not arteries when I put that thing around? And also, I put the bladder on the inside of my upper arms and the strap on the outside. Am I doing that right, or should I be doing it a different way?
No, you're doing it correctly. This sort of can open up into a general conversation about what blood flow restriction is. So it's a pretty wide umbrella. It's kind of casts a big net. There's sort of adapted blood pressure cuffs, which we kind of refer to as wide rigid cuffs. There's narrow elastic cut or bands, I should say. Think of like knee wraps or even the resistance bands that people have used in the past. And then there's also, Be Strong, which applies sort of this semi-elastic compression. And this is sort of in the same vein, if you will, that Kotze was sort of originally developed as. Now, all of them are going to have slightly different approaches, but the main effect or main kind of aim is to get venous occlusion and to leave the artery alone, in a sense. Now, again, as I alluded to, there's kind of many ways to skin a cat. There's many ways to achieve that. Typically, with a wide rigid cuff, you need to go with relatively lower pressures in order to just occlude the veins intermittently and not affect the arterial inflow. The reason why we're able to collapse the veins and not the arteries is due to their form and function. So with the arteries, we have thick, smooth muscle surrounding all of our arteries, and that's going to be responsible for vasodilating and then vasoconstricting. That's sort of a neural component. And then with the veins, there's still a smooth muscle surrounding it, but it's very, very thin. And so they're easily collapsible. And, if people are listening in, they can kind of do this on themselves. If you look at one of your superficial veins, you can kind of collapse it upwards and it'll actually collapse the vein. Much harder to do that with an artery. So from that, you can make sure that you're not occluding by using ultrasound or Doppler to see if you're actually getting arterial inflow. Another way that has been proposed is to use a pulse ox. So make sure that you're actually getting a pulse in the finger. That's another indication that you're likely not occluding arterial inflow. Or even just as simple as checking your radial pulse. If you have a pulse, you're definitely not occluding. It's a little bit harder to gauge how much percent occlusion you're actually inducing with that. So, that's kind of the nutshell and kind of introduction to different forms.
Now, would you agree that a lot of people used to just buy cheap tourniquets? That's dangerous, right? I mean, when the original work was done, they used blood pressure cuffs specifically so they could adjust and understand how much pressure is being applied. When you use these rigid rubber straps that I see a lot of people using, or even a tourniquet type rubber strap, you don't really know if you are completely occluding blood flow, right?
Right. So, to clarify that point, I think a main takeaway from today is that many different types of blood flow restriction work and are effective. Some have a wider range of safety and efficacy. Some have a more narrow range. And so all of this stuff works, but your approach is important. So with a wide rigid cuff, it's very easy to collapse the arteries. We typically think of a blood pressure cuff going up above systolic pressure, and systolic pressure represents the pressure needed to collapse an artery. That's what that 120/80, right? The 120 represents the millimeters of mercury necessary to collapse the artery fully. Now, with a sort of a wide rigid cuff like that, what we're doing is we're going up to a limb occlusion pressure, and we assess this via ultrasound. And then we back off to as much as 80% of that pressure, or as low as 30 to 40% of that pressure. Now, when you start exercising, as you well know, your blood pressure goes up. So what we determine at rest as an occlusive pressure is significantly below what we'd consider an occlusive pressure during exercise. So that's an important distinction, number one. Number two, due to the nature of the arteries, as long as we're allowing arterial inflow into the muscle, into that limb, I should say, and intermittently impeding the venous outflow, we're still inducing blood flow restriction in a more rapid onset of fatigue.
Now, Peter, you're in my age range. You're 60 years old, and you compete. Let me
I
put
do.
this. We have an ad that we're going to promote here in just a second, but it gives a great picture of you, and that's you right now, and you're wearing the upper BFR bands in this picture. Do you feel that BFR has allowed you to build muscle and strength at a safer, low risk way, considering that we're older and we get injured easily? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. My main focus with the BFRs, because like you, I know you like to train heavy, and I also like to train heavy, but training heavy with lower reps, you don't get as much of a pump. And so the way that I really like to use the bands is two ways. I like to use them to finish my workout, the last third of my workout. For instance, on a leg day, I'll squat heavy. I'm only about 160 pounds, but I'll squat up to 400 pounds, and I'll try to in a leg workout, I'll try to get 30 reps with a minimum of 300 pounds over 4 or 5 sets. And then what I
Mhm.
like to do after that is I like to finish my workout with the bands, and I like to do the typical 3 sets of 30 repetitions on a leg extension, so that
Right.
I'm really, really focusing on getting the blood flow, to finish off my workout, so that I'm maximizing my ability to continue to lift heavy, but also to get that pump that we're all looking for. And so that's the main way that I use the blood flow restriction bands. And every workout that I do, it's the last exercise, I will put them on, and I'll do those 3 sets of 30 reps with a 20-second rest to finish off. But also, knowing that the body is stimulated by using the bands, and the pituitary gland and the extra resources that are liberated when you're getting that oxygen deprivation in the muscles, to the brain is thinking you're working so much harder than you are, and so
Mhm.
it's liberating those resources to finish off my workout, giving me those extra resources, and growth hormone is one of them. And so additionally, if I'm nursing an injury, I can use the bands for that aspect also, where I can still train a body part and not have to go as heavy, and utilize the bands to get the job done. And again, liberate those resources of growth hormone, which will help the body heal faster. And I've noticed that growth hormone is lipolytic. It burns fat as well. So it's a systemic response. So I really like to use the bands coming into competition, because at 60 years old, as we know, everything is less efficient. And because of that, the bands give me an advantage to maximize my hormonal output in testosterone, growth hormone, by stimulating the way that they do.
And
So,
if I could just tag on to
Sten,
that, I think, yeah.
yeah, please.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a lot of really good points there, Peter. So, and one of the things that we think about with overall training or chronic training programs is this balance between this catabolic breakdown and this anabolic response. And one thing to clarify, I think, for the audience is we get growth hormone responses from regular training as well. It's just usually the cost associated with that anabolic response is going to be higher. You're going to have a longer recovery time. And so I think your word of efficiency is key here, because we're able to induce those anabolic responses without as much cost. So you're getting a little bit more bang for your buck, if you will, in a more efficient way. Now, I think it is important, as you mentioned, to include relatively heavy compound lifts, so that you're still getting those specific adaptations to that heavy load, but then adding on BFR for your accessory work, or, you know, specifically looking at, you know, as you mentioned, the leg extension, the quad exercises, and really getting a metabolic burn in that specific muscle.
Right.
And that's a really big stimulus. So one way to think about it is, you know, maybe you're limiting, or you're trying to kind of reach that ceiling effect of growth hormone with your normal compound lifts, and then really getting that extra little bump, if you will, and making sure that you're maximizing that effect with each training session, as opposed to trying to look for, you know, 2 or 3 training sessions a week to do that. You can really theoretically do that every day or twice a day if you really want to.
Yeah, I'll use them for recovery as well, on a recovery, you know, to just go and do some body weight squats and push-ups, just to kind of stimulate that response, to also speed recovery on an off day, on a recovery day.
Yeah, I think that's a huge application of this, because normally on those quote unquote off days or recovery days, you're not maximally stimulating growth hormone, because you're not doing this relatively high volume or catabolic exercise. And so with the BFR, the sort of chronic effect, I think, is the really big key here, because you're able to induce those excessive increases in growth hormone consistently, almost on a daily basis.
I put them on at the beginning of my workout, and I leave them on, and I don't do any pump work. You know, I actually just started deadlifting again. I haven't deadlifted in years. I'm starting very light, but it still feels taxing to me because I haven't deadlifted in a while. And at first I was concerned because of the possible changes in hemodynamics, especially because, you know, I'm sequestering large amounts of blood in my legs. But I've been fine. I mean, you know, Dominic D'Agostino said that he did a squat session, and Dominic still squats pretty heavy, even though he is more into the science of ketosis nowadays. I think he said he was squatting like 500 pounds, and he had to grab the uprights because he became lightheaded. I don't do high reps of heavy stuff with the bands on, but I'm moving heavy weight, and I'm seeing an amazing pump even in fewer reps. Now, I must say that I do a high volume routine. I do a movement for time. So I'll pick this movement. I'll do it for 15 minutes, and I may only do 5 reps, but I may end up doing 12 sets of that. But I'm moving very heavy weight. Am I missing out by not doing a drop set and doing 20, 30 reps with it?
I would say there's many different protocols that you can apply with blood flow restriction, and I think that, you know, staying in this framework of, you know, either the 3x30 sets and reps, or the kind of more popularized version as of late is the 4x4 sets, you know, 20 to 30 reps on the first set, followed by 3 sets of 15. Really, what that tells me is that there's many approaches to this. And really what we're shooting for is a big fatigue signal, a perceived fatigue, a perceived disturbance of homeostasis that then the brain responds to in spades. And so I think that's an interesting application of it. You're still accumulating quite a bit of volume within that time. One thing to point out here is you mentioned hemodynamics. So I did my master's at the Cardiovascular Aging Research Lab at the University of Texas, Austin. And one of the things that we're looking at right now is looking at different vascular responses to different forms of BFR, whether that's you know, nylon, inelastic Hokinson cuffs, Be Strong, and then also like basically a tourniquet, rubber tourniquet. And what we're finding is we have
a comment.
What we're finding is really quick is we see some retrograde flow occurring with retrograde flow means backwards flow within the artery, which causes turbulent flow and may actually have a little bit of a damaging effect on the arteries. Now, that's not to say that within a narrow window we can be safe with these other forms, but really the goal is to basically, in a theoretical world, we'd love to keep that artery patent at all times and just be working on the veins. In reality, we can't go into the skin and stop up the veins without affecting the whole limb, right? But in reality, this is sort of the hack that we've been able to try to meet. Sorry,
why does that? No. I'll put it back up. I want to stay with this for a second. So, how does this potentially injure the artery? Is it because there are valves in the artery that are designed to stop backflow, and you're basically overpowering them with pressure?
So that's the veins. Veins have one-way valves, and actually varicose veins are essentially a degradation of those valves, and that's why you see this kind of like zigzag veins on people. Basically, they've blown out their valves in their veins. We do not have those in the arteries. We do, however, have, and this is both in veins and arteries, we do have something called the endothelial lining within the arteries. And that's a single layer of cells that lines all of your arteries and really harbors or is responsible for releasing molecules, chief of which is nitric oxide, to cause a vasodilation or increase in the diameter of that artery. And by doing that, you increase blood flow. When we have retrograde flow and we have turbulent flow, you can kind of think about it, to simplify, your heart and your cardiovascular system is a pump and tubes. And typically on the inside of the very middle of the artery has the fastest flow. Towards the outside, it's a little bit slower. Now, when you have retrograde flow, it causes turbulence within that tube. And that can be damaging. That's associated with what we call oxidative stress. And then we have an inflammatory response after that oxidative stress. Something that happens with, to take an extreme example, during a myocardial infarction, what happens is you make a certain coronary artery blocked, which makes the muscle, the cardiac tissue itself, ischemic. That's actually not what causes the damage to the artery. It's really the reperfusion of blood flow once that blockage is cleared. Right. And that reperfusion of blood flow holds a bunch of oxidants that ends up creating a damaging effect in the artery. And then we can subsequently measure the ability of that artery to vasodilate, and in turn, that gives us an indication of how healthy the artery is. Well, when you have turbulent flow, when you have excessive increases in oxidative stress, that diminishes the ability of that artery to vasodilate. Kind of taking it one step further, when you diminish the ability of the artery to vasodilate, you increase the pressure placed on the artery, right? If your artery is no longer able to accommodate an increase in pressure by dilating, that pressure in there then increases, right? So you're constricted now. And so that kind of sets up this positive feedback loop of causing even more damage. So, and it's something that you sort of alluded to in the beginning, this is called ischemia reperfusion injury. And that is not necessarily at play with blood flow restriction per se, but that's associated with excessive increases in oxidative stress, and it damages the artery. So there's actually this thing called ischemic preconditioning, and I'll let you come in a second. There's this thing called ischemic preconditioning, which essentially preconditions, gets the artery ready to handle excessive increases in oxidative stress, and basically makes that artery more resilient to stress. In my lab right now, we've actually just published a paper looking at the ability of hypoxia or systemic hypoxia, breathing in low oxygen, and that can actually attenuate this reduction in arterial function following excessive increases in oxidative stress. So again, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a whole host of things going on.
I'll tell you something else. Yeah, so there's a peptide that I use with regularity called thymosin beta 4. I use very low doses daily. Thymosin beta 4 has been shown to reverse any damage done by ischemia reperfusion of the heart and of the brain. In fact, it's in second level trials in humans as a rescue drug post ischemic event. What they find is that when someone has an ischemic event, whether it be in the brain in the form of a stroke or the heart, giving them 4 milligrams within 6 hours of the event, the evidence of ischemia, necrotic tissue, it's all gone in 5 to 6 months. It also affects fibrinogen and some other fibrotic signaling molecules from building up scar tissue, which is a problem. Post ischemia reperfusion, the body builds up some scar tissue, and so I know that it's not like you could go, oh, I should use it. I use it daily anyway for aging purposes or anti-aging purposes, but it sounds like that's a good thing to consider. I want to put this comment from Aiden Ray, and then we're going to take our first break. So Aiden says, as I move through an exercise session, the pump increases. Thus, I'm assuming the resistance band pressure increases as well. Technically it does, because it's not expanding. It's staying where you originally set it due to the pump that has built up. Do you ever then release the band pressure or lower it, obviously, because you have gauges on the B Strong band, so you know how much pressure is being pumped, and then release the band pressure a few more reps or sets versus utilizing the bands as you last set them? Just wondering if one method has worked or failed you during your personal trials with band training. I personally, I probably overpump mine because I have some anomalies in my arm where my tricep has been reattached and the outer head of my bicep is shortened, and so I have like this divot, and the left hand band doesn't get quite as tight as the right one, so I overpump it. But what do you think about that? Should we adjust as we go?
Yeah, I'll kind of take a stab at it, and then I'll let Peter kind of give his 2 cents on it. But I think this gets into differences in types of cuffs and types of bands a little bit. I think with a more rigid system where you're not allowing the muscle to sort of expand into the band, where there's no elasticity in the band, I think maybe that'd be a good thing. Generally speaking, though, as long as we're not occluding the arteries, there's no need to deflate in between sets. Now, having said that, and specifically, I have kind of an example right here using the B Strong bands. As we constrict, let's see here, it's important to note that the outer part of this band is actually stitched material. And so that's why I've kind of called it a semi-elastic band, because in reality, out to a certain diameter of the limb, it is not flexible. So, in an ideal world, we want to surround the limb with this band and then inflate it such that there's actually some give to the actual band. Mm-hmm. The muscle has somewhere to go into, right? These have give where the muscle can go mm-hmm. into. Now, I would not recommend deflating the bands. Okay, so I would not release the air pressure that I've pumped it up to. I would simply accommodate the increase in the circumference of the limb post pump, right? So that you're just slightly letting out the the circumference of the band to accommodate that increase in limb size. And so you're still creating a restriction of blood flow, but now you're accommodating the increase in the diameter of the limb from that pump. Does that sort of make sense?
But I would think that it would be easier and more precise to reattach the pump if you know you had it pumped up to whatever setting initially, and just taking it down a couple I would say milligrams of mercury, but it's a pneumatic rating. Then because once you jump really fast, probably faster than you wanted it to. But I get it. Yeah, you could experiment with it, I would imagine. Yeah. Peter, what do you think?
So I don't usually decrease the millimeters of mercury, the pressure. However, the way that the B Strong bands are constructed, you can just, without reattaching the pump, you can just push on the nipple that the pump goes into. Just a quick hit. If you want to just diminish it just slightly, just a quick hit, and that would suffice if you felt that they were too tight. But typically I like to keep them, I would probably, I usually use between 350 and 450 to 500 millimeters of mercury on my arms and legs. And if I ever do feel, I don't usually ever do it, but if I did, I would just kind of hit it and drop it down a tad. That would be sufficient.
That would be the easiest and fastest thing. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
that would be easiest and fast. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we have lots more to talk about. If you have questions and you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, feel free to post, and we'll get to everybody's questions. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio.
Dogs should be powered by fat and protein, not carbs. That's why Visionary Pet makes low-carb, ketogenic dog food for dogs of all breeds and life stages. From kibble to freeze-dried and even low-carb treats, all Visionary Pet recipes are very low-carb, ketogenic, and made with 100% real meat protein. Shop now and use code SHR for 20% off your first order today. Your dog deserves the lifelong benefits of optimal nutrition. Make the switch to Visionary and see why smart dogs eat low carb.
Never before has a product been so appropriately named as Botanic Tonics Feel Free. This plant-based elixir combines a variety of different effective compounds, all from raw plant materials that at different doses provide you with completely different experiences. A third of a bottle puts you in the zone and makes you very focused and is ideal for a non-stimulating pre-workout. It also has a mild analgesic effect for us older lifters who have soreness and little pains and aches that keep us from training as ferociously as we want. A half a bottle will create a mild euphoric effect that will allow you to forego consuming alcohol, but still be socially lubricated and have fun. I have never had a product deliver on its name the way Botanic Tonics Feel Free does, and I won't ever be without it, and you shouldn't either. Go to shrnetwork.biz/feel-free and use the code SHR40 for 40% off your first order. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. There are lots of concerns about food supply today. That's why you need White Oak Pastures. White Oak Pastures will deliver food right to your doorstep. You don't even have to go out and be disappointed by shopping in grocery stores. The finest beef, pork, lamb, duck, and more can be found at White Oak Pastures. And now they even have seafood. And best of all, White Oak Pastures has a negative carbon footprint, which means that you don't have to feel guilty for eating your ribeye. Go to shrnetwork.biz/white oak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 15% off. P3OM from Bioptimizers is a patented prebiotic and probiotic supplement with Lactobacillus plantarum OM. It has now been upgraded to P3OM 2.0 with the addition of a superfood formulation that makes it 2 times stronger, as well as maximizes L. plantarum's strength. So it's more powerful than ever, which means that not only will it help you completely digest all animal proteins, it also reduces cortisol, causes deep relaxation and better sleep, and reduces stress. Go to shrnetwork.biz/P3-OM today and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off.
This is the Superhuman Channel, where we use oxygen for the power of good.
Welcome back. You know, I have to say something. It's always baffled me why more people don't use BFR bands, especially the B Strong, because they're designed around the original science. They're not book straps, they're not tourniquets, they're not, rubber tubes. They really are precise the way that you are allowed to apply the pressure. And I see so many people buying stupid stuff, and these work. I'm telling you, they work. I guarantee they work. Everybody who has ever bought them, the last time we had the campaign with B Strong, has come back and told me they love them. You see results quickly in weeks and sometimes days, and it doesn't take long to realize that they're working. I don't understand. I really, it's one of those mysteries to me why more people don't use them. I use them every time I go to the gym. Some days I go to the street clothes. I put them on in my car and walk into the gym with them, under my hoodie. But obviously on my street clothes and my pants, I put them on the outside of my pants, and they work amazing. If you want to check them out and learn more about them, go to shrnetwork.biz/bstrong, BSTRONG. Use the code SHR15 for 15% discount. I say this in all honesty. They are more effective than anabolic steroids. You will see gains way faster than taking any anabolic steroid, and they're safer. You don't have to worry about any metabolic changes or lipids or blood problems, because they're not going to mess with you metabolically. They're just going to build strong muscles faster. That's all they're going to do. Again, shrnetwork.biz/bstrong, and use the code SHR15 for 15% off. It baffles me because people are so susceptible to bullshit products in the bodybuilding community. Whether it's a supplement or, you can name it. There's things out there that really don't deliver on the promises. And BFR bands deliver on the promises. Why don't more people, and Pete, I'm going to ask you, because why do people ask you about them when you're wearing them? And why do you think more people don't use them? Because they work.
They do in the gym. They do ask me. However, in my practice, the way that I use them is, I've got a very active patient base. I'm more of an active care practitioner versus passive care. I can do 10% of what needs to be done for people. I set their biomechanics straight, and then it's up to them to continue to do their homework and do the things that they need to do to keep things going in the right direction. And so the way I like to use the bands in my practice is just weekend warriors, everyday people. I just have them put them on during the day when they're doing yard work, when they're doing housework, when they're going for a hike, when they're going for a walk, jog, so you're going to get more of a benefit using the bands and doing those activities and just doing those activities alone. And people come back to the office and they just can't believe the results they get. And, they can maybe only go half as far, but they have the opportunity to just take some of the air out, or walk with them without any air in them, and then reinflate them. And that starts a trend for them of using the bands a lot more often for a lot of other activities. So it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically for a workout. But when they're doing their exercises, when they're in the gym, and when they're obviously that's a primary use. But in the gym, people look, I don't know about you, Carl, but people will see what I'm doing. And the people that are more intuitive, they just ask the questions. But a lot of people will just not really engage because they're not quite sure what they are. So, but I really like them in my practice for what I just stated. And people really, once they start using them, they see the benefit and they start seeing results, and they continue to use them where they didn't. It's one of those things like a supplement. You'll take a supplement, you don't know if it's working or not working. But with the bands, they're working because you have a fatigue factor that you feel when you're using them that is real, and it resonates with people.
I mean, I wear them to do morning cardio. I get on the treadmill, I have them on, and cardio is hard. It is harder. The congested muscle is harder to get it to function. But when I'm done, my quads are pumped like insane. It looks like I just did a leg routine. And the other thing I love doing with them is I put the arm bands on and the leg bands on, and I do farmer's walks with heavy kettlebells. I have a 1/4-mile circle near my house, and I can do that 1/4-mile circle and not have to drop the kettlebells very often. They're 60-pound kettlebells. But when I have the bands on, I got to drop them every like 15 minutes. I got to drop them and recover. What about Sten? I know you were going to finish your comment, and I want to ask you a question about cardiovascular training.
Yeah, and actually that's exactly where I was going. But just
you were going to say something.
Peter kind of just hit the nail on the head. I think I was certainly guilty of this, even though it was coming from my dad, who's world-renowned expert in human performance. We were all a bit skeptical that just placing bands on your limbs, like you're going to get a better workout. Like it's not exactly intuitive. And so it really requires you doing it to really understand and have that aha moment, that light bulb go off to where you're like, oh, this is just making my normal exercise more efficient. It's just hitting that same point that I'm actually trying to achieve with normal exercise, just faster and more efficiently. So I think that's a huge point there.
You're getting there sooner, right?
Exactly. And with less cost, as we kind of mentioned before. So that's a huge component. As far as cardiovascular, so I do want to talk about that for a second, both in your experience with walking, farmers walks, and things like that. One of the seminal studies that came out was really what was called Katsu walking. It was in these untrained people who were actually in the clinic. They couldn't really do very much exercise to begin with because they were so metabolically diseased or just inhibited. And they had people just walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes at a time. And they showed hypertrophy of the quads just from walking at 3 or 4 miles an hour. So that was really profound. You're getting both a musculoskeletal benefit, but you're also getting a cardio benefit. And this kind of frames it nicely with the idea behind cardio. One of the things that you're doing with cardiovascular training is limiting venous return. So normally when you're kind of at your maximal cardiac capacity, cardiovascular capacity, one of the things that happens is you can kind of think about it like your muscles are stealing away your blood from your heart. So you're limiting how much blood is coming back to the heart. We call that venous return. Well, that limitation or that limited amount of blood coming back to the heart is sensed by the atria in the heart. And when the atria and subsequently the ventricles are detecting less filling, less blood pushed into that, what we call preload of the heart, that's a stimulus to increase what we call blood volume. Blood volume is literally what it sounds like. It's how much blood is in your body at one point. The more blood volume you have, generally, the more blood to go around, and therefore the more output you can have. And so what we're doing with BFR is we're actually mechanically restricting how much blood is coming back to the heart. We're reducing venous return for an otherwise trivial or relatively easy exercise, and that's going to boost blood volume. Now, the chronic effect of increases in blood volume, and we do this with heat, we do this with altitude exposure or hypoxia exposure, is something called hemodilution. So people are probably familiar with hematocrit. It's basically hematocrit is the number of red blood cells you have in your blood volume. Generally, it's anywhere from 40 to 50%. People who are doping, right, they're taking EPO or reinfusing red blood cells into their bloodstream, are trying to increase their hematocrit. When they increase the hematocrit, they increase their ability to get oxygen to the tissues. So when you hemodilute, when you reduce the amount of hematocrit, hematocrit is a percentage, so it's a relative to your blood volume. When you reduce that, that's a stimulus for EPO to get activated, and you end up producing more red blood cells. So, kind of taking the whole cascade along the line, you need to have a sort of a chronic exposure to this reduction in blood volume to really induce these changes. But there is a place for this. Increasing blood volume alone will actually boost your performance. And you've probably experienced this too. One of the things to acutely increase your blood volume is to increase your salt intake. So you take a bunch of salt before you work out. Right. That actually acutely increases your blood volume, and you get a bigger pump that way as well.
Right. But also because of the compartmentalization, does the heart work harder? Do you get more bang for that movement because the heart is being challenged? Blood flow isn't coming back fast enough. I would imagine that this has a beneficial effect far beyond just, let's say, walking. Your heart is working. Everybody's into zone 2 now, but with these on, I would imagine your heart's going to get stronger faster.
For sure. So Again, a little bit of cardiovascular physiology background here. Cardiac output is how much blood is coming out of your heart per minute, right? The more cardiac output, the more blood's going to those muscles. Well, cardiac output is a function of heart rate, how many beats you have in a minute, times stroke volume, which is how much blood is pumped out of the heart per beat. Okay, so heart rate times stroke volume equals cardiac output. What I was kind of alluding to earlier, when you reduce how much blood is coming back to the heart, you reduce preload, you reduce stroke volume. So coming back to that mathematical equation here, when we reduce stroke volume for the same work output, we have to raise heart rate to maintain that cardiac output. So as stroke volume goes down, heart rate has to come up to make sure that the actual cardiac output stays the same. And so that in and of itself is a stimulus to improve stroke volume, which is really, we don't increase our heart rate, really. It's really mainly determined by age, but we can affect our stroke volume, how much blood's coming out of the heart per beat. And so that's
that's the metric. That's the metric that cardiologists look at, the ejection fraction. That's the metric that they look at for a strong heart.
Exactly.
Interesting. Craig Hollander, and this is going to be a great segue for something that I do that we talked about earlier. So Craig Hollander says, when using the bands in everyday movement, how many minutes can you keep them on? And I shared with you that I have this thing I'm experimenting with, and I am seeing great results, which is, I call it passive use of them. I wear them to the gym. I train. I don't leave them on my legs, but I leave them on my arms for a few hours after training. And I have that same pump while I'm here typing on the computer and so on. And while I don't want to encourage it, I'm experimenting with it just to see. And I do see changes in my upper arms happening. How long should you wear them for? Can you wear them for? Especially if you're just wearing them, like Peter said, just wearing them, around doing everyday things like he has some of his patients doing.
Yeah. So a couple things here. It depends a little bit on the cuff. If you are at all restricting arterial inflow with sort of a wide rigid cuff, I would not recommend doing that because you are affecting the inflow of blood. Now, the Be Strong bands were designed specifically to not occlude the arterial inflow, simply to restrict the venous outflow, as I mentioned before. So theoretically, you could wear these for, as you're doing. Now, I just want to put a disclaimer. I would not recommend people doing that. We do not recommend people doing that. But having said that, it is theoretically possible to do that. And I think what's going on is you're just maintaining the pump after that workout, and just kind of keeping the blood, making sure that the muscles are swollen, literally with blood and water and things like that after the workout. I would always approach these things gradually. So, someone like you who's been lifting your whole life and is very familiar with the stress, the stimulus of BFR, I think that's fine. Someone starting out, I wouldn't necessarily have them on for hours at a time. I would kind of start ramping up, just like anything else. Progressive overload applies, right? So any stimulus that your body gets used to, you kind of need to keep pushing it further and further. Within that framework, it is possible to do that. I wouldn't go for extended periods of time without any muscle contraction. So, even typing at your computer, you're still contracting your forearm muscles, which is going to be good enough, right? But one of the things to understand about BFR, specifically as it relates to Be Strong, is the muscle pump, the skeletal muscle pump, we call it, is what's driving this intermittent flow of venous blood. So it's really that constriction, that pressure that we're generating. And because of the one-way valves in the veins, it's going to push only one way, and that's back towards the heart, past the band. So, a lot of things to consider there. But I think it's fine, especially if you're working at a desk. Maybe don't be just sitting there stagnant, not moving at all for hours on end. But theoretically, this is safe because, again, we're not affecting the arterial inflow.
So, Peter, I've experimented with different lengths of time. And what I found is if I wear them for an hour or so after my workout, everything seems to be fine, except that when I take them off, I have that pump pretty much for hours after. But one day I wore them for 6 hours after training, which is a little stupid, but I've already explained how stupid I am.
Yeah.
And I noticed that lymph fluid started to get congested. Like my wrists started to get thicker and my hands were puffy, like an old person's hands get puffy. And I thought, well, probably 6 hours is too long. Would you agree with that? If lymph fluid is starting to gather, you've had them on too long?
Right, because it doesn't take much pressure to stagnate lymph fluid. I mean, even with the lymphatic massage, it's a very light massage. If the lymph tissue will collapse very easily under too much pressure. So it's a very light massage. So what I like to do is I like to have my patients wear them, pump them up, take some of the air out, even to zero, continue to do their activity, almost like you're just doing sets and taking a rest in between. So it's not consistent throughout a long period like you're doing a 6-hour set, and so that way you're getting a return of blood flow, getting back to normal. And so they're, it's like they're doing a workout throughout the day where they're just doing extended periods with them on and then with them off. And they can keep the bands on because if they're loose enough, it's not really promoting any of those things. So that's how I like to have my patient base use them, if they're going to use them for their daily activities. If they're going to go on a hike and they can do half, get the same workout with half the time, and they enjoy that aspect of it. It is more, they're more prone to using the bands and working out because they know that they can do a 10 or 15 minute workout versus a 30 to 40 minute workout where they may not have time. And then if they want to leave them on, if they're doing just some daily activity, what I would call chronic cardio around the house or walking, then you can pump them up, take some out. And, usually when you leave them on and you don't have any air in them, you don't really even notice they're there. They're just, and most people are working from home these days, so they care anyways.
Yeah, they're still having, because I've had one deflate, like on the arm. Sometimes if the hoodie I'm wearing is too tight, it'll hit the nozzle, and I'll have one deflate, but I didn't notice it when I was training because it felt like as though it was causing the same amount of congestion. And I'm like, oh wow, this one's been empty all morning. But we have a question from Holly Blumenberg. I want to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to take her question because it's interesting. And it also plays in nicely to a discussion that I wanted to invoke. But first, we're going to put this back up. I'm telling you right now, you will not be disappointed if you try the Be Strong BFR bands. They are the best product on the market. They're made in the same way of the original researchers used, which is like a blood pressure cuff. And you can measure how much pressure you're applying. So, it's same for each arm and each leg. And they work great. They last forever. They're very well made. Go to shrnetwork.biz/bestrong and use the code SHR15 for 15% off. And, maybe you just want to work on your upper body. Maybe you just want to make your arms bigger. You can buy the up arm bands, you can buy the leg bands, or you can buy them as a set. Again, build muscle, build strength, increase growth hormone, build less body fat, and increase lean body mass. And if you're older, like I am, this is going to help you achieve your goals faster and not put you in a zone of risk. So go shrnetwork.biz/bestrong and use the code SHR15. We will be right back with more Superhuman Radio, and we'll get to Holly Blumenberg's question. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to do anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is My Pillow. I've been sleeping with My Pillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have My Pillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/mypillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website. There have been no real breakthroughs in resistance training for over 200 years. Whether it's pulleys or free weight, they all depend on gravity and the angles associated with gravity's effect directly on the weight. All of that has changed with the ARX machine. ARX stands for adaptive resistance. The ARX machine uses a 25 horsepower motor. You are literally fighting against a 25 horsepower motor, so every single rep is your 1 rep maximum at that moment in time. But ARX leverages another technique that has been known to produce rapid muscle gains and strength, and that is it leverages the eccentric or negative portion of the rep, which completely blows every other exercise and resistance training product out of the water. Go to shrnetwork.biz/ARX and discover the future of resistance training. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that connects customers with partnered providers from the comfort of your home. Merrick provides concierge service with your very own patient care provider as your health advocate. You'll go over all your needs and goals from improving sexual function, hair loss
Real quick,
prevention,
we're just on a break. What's up?
fat loss, and overall improved
No,
performance.
we're just in the middle of the break. Doing okay so far?
Ordered and shipped directly to you if you meet the requirements. All from the comfort of your home. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Merrick Health.
Okay.
That's MAREKHEALTH and order your comprehensive.
Yeah, hold on.
And
Before
get
you go
10% off
on,
with
he's not really
get
quite
to add the
getting it.
lab analysis
I'm
to
sure
have
you're right,
results
but that's okay.
reviewed with potential over-the-counter supplements or treatment recommendations. That's
I'll try to
shrnetwork.biz/Merrick Health. Use code SHR at checkout or order your own desired labs with code SHR and get 10% off your first lab order.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. Don't hate us because we feel good.
Welcome back. So we have an interesting question that actually plays into something that I want to talk about specifically. And it's from Holly Blumenberg. She says, I have used BFR on and off for a couple years, but consistently before a total hip replacement. I'm about to start using them again, but it's most uncomfortable 15 minutes almost into it. Let's see. Almost painful. Am I using too much pressure? And any tips on using it in a hip replacement environment? Who wants to grab that?
I can take that.
But I want to hear Peter too, because he's an ART practitioner. I'm sure he's worked with a lot of people. Right. You go first. You lead on.
So if it's uncomfortable, I would kind of ask exactly where is the discomfort, and if it's in the joint versus in the muscle versus in over the compression of the band. So a few questions to kind of follow up there, but in general, we should try to avoid things that cause pain. Now, there needs to be a distinction between the sort of metabolic burn in the muscle that we're getting versus the pain within the joint that's sharp pain. There's also a little bit, and I'll let Peter kind of speak to this, but there's a little bit of initial pain just from using that joint after a hip replacement that you can kind of sort of the joints have this thing called synovial fluid, which needs to kind of be reinvigorated to make to lube up the joint in that way. So with that, I'll let Peter kind of take it.
Yeah, I actually do rehab on hip replacements from a local surgeon in San Diego. And, before the replacement, we do a lot of prehab so that we get as much range of motion in the limb as possible before the surgeon goes in and does the replacement. It makes his job easier. And so because the joint is a limiting factor, the muscle's range of motion is limited because of the joint. So over time, the muscle develops a lot of some atrophy and some adhesive tissue, makes it almost more like beef jerky. And so what we try to do, I use something called the rapid release to break down all of the adhesive tissue as much as possible. But again, the joint is a limiting factor. So after the surgery, it switches to the opposite. Now, the joint is no longer the limiting factor because it's a device that has a range of motion that is not going to limit that movement, but the muscles become the limiting factor. So many times you now have muscles that have not had the ability to move in that range of motion for maybe years. Some people will wait years before they get replaced. And so the pain is mostly what I experience with these sorts of things is because of the lack of mobility of the muscle post-surgically, we have to work at reestablishing as much of the range as possible. And so trying just to move that limb where it hasn't been able to move prior to surgery will be painful at the muscular level. And there's a lot of adhesive tissue, a lot of scar tissue that develops. And there's a lot of nerve endings that the scar tissue will grow around, and there'll be obstructions so that there will be some nerve pain potentially, as well as the musculoskeletal pain itself. So typically, active release technique is that gold standard for soft tissue issues, which that's this surgeon uses me only because I'm an ART practitioner. And maximizing. So what I would recommend is for Holly to maybe search out a soft tissue specialist, specifically an ART, active release technique specialist. And she can go on the national website, which is activerelease.com. And there's a doctor locator there in whatever part of the country she's in. And maybe work with a specialist in that area, because that is typically what I see post joint replacement. There's lots of things that the muscles are now being called to do, which their hands were tied prior to surgery.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I've always understand this, when you have a joint injury, the body tries to splint it, and
Correct.
The way it splints it is through proprioceptive triggers that don't allow the joint to go into that range of motion where it hurts. And if, like you said, if you've lived with a hip problem, and usually there for a very long time before people want to go, it's a very tough surgery. You've lived with it for years. Now all of a sudden the joint's not the problem anymore. It has the range of motion, but the muscles are still restricting it because the muscles still think we've got to protect this hip. So I agree with you 1,000%. ART, selective stretching, those types of things to let the muscles know, hey, you don't have to splint this joint any longer to keep it out of pain. We can take it into a new range. It's almost like you're going to have to relearn. That joint is going to have to relearn what its limitations are because they've changed dramatically. Well, she also says, go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's also a joint that it doesn't really have a limitation. And, and even if you want to expand a little bit beyond that, most people walk around with patterns that are created from work, sleep, and recreation. That's about 90% of how we spend our lives, doing those three things. And when they come into the office, you're going to create, like when you're sleeping in a fetal position, your hip flexors are going to shorten. You're going to create all kinds of issues and those hip flexors cross the hip joint as well. So, you could expand this to a wider audience in the sense that most people will have limitations at the joint because of the soft tissues. And so it's vitally important to be able to reset. Even if your pecs are short, if your lats are short, you're going to have some shoulder limitations. And so you're going to have some pain when you're trying to do some activity there with the bands because the muscles are limiting. So, but in general, that is the, that seems to be the problem that we walk around with. And being my specialty, my job is to identify those patterns. And before the patient, most people don't understand they have an adaptive shortening, because the muscles will adaptively shorten. Like Carl, you said, there is a splinting going on. That's, if it's a kind of an acute thing, it's a splinting spasm. The body is trying to cast itself internally so that it does not injure itself further. But the longer you go, you start to develop an adhesive tissue formation across the muscle fibers that now don't allow them to mechanically go until you get rid of those adhesions, because it's been a long-term situation. So you've got the acute splinting, especially after an acute injury, but then it becomes a chronic, not so much of a splinting, but of an adaptive shortening. And, that will limit many people and create pain that they don't know where it's coming from. And that's how they end up in my office.
And she just confirmed that with her last statement. She says the joint is not painful. And I don't think the joint can be painful, because I don't think there's any nerves in the joint itself.
Right.
Yeah. But she says, her muscles are burning, and that's a sign of sometimes a muscle stretching into a new range that it hasn't been in for a while. But what she really wants to know is, now that she's 4 weeks out, can she start using BFR? Would you recommend that she do some ART first before implementing BFR?
Well, absolutely, because the muscle burning, if you think about it, I look at the glue that develops this adaptive shortening as, now you're taking these muscle fibers out of action. And when you then start to use, because you have more range of motion with the joint, you got to remember those fibers are going to be totally deconditioned. They're almost like virgin fibers that have not been used in how many months, weeks, or years. And so they're going to be deconditioned. So when you first start, it's going to be like you've never used that muscle before, as at that fiber level. So when I do ART, we're releasing a lot of that adhesive tissue and we're opening up. And so what I will tell my patient to do is, you can't go from 0 to 100 if you've never worked out or never did an exercise with that muscle, because it's deconditioned as if it hasn't done any work in weeks, months, or years. You can't just expect to do normal things with it. You have to ramp up. So I would absolutely use the bands is early on, but with the caveat that you would want to kind of gradually ramp up, because your body has an enzymatic system, proteolytic enzymes that are designed to go and recover that adhesive tissue that forms, and to bring it back in to be used somewhere else on a rainy day, when something else goes wrong. So, you have to get blood flow into those muscles so that enzymatic system, which travels through the blood. I use a proteolytic enzyme called serrapeptase to advance, the scar tissue, adhesive tissue removal after an injury or a surgery. And but that would probably be a big reason why she'd get a lot of burning after, because those muscles are just so deconditioned and they need to be ramped up over a period of time. But the bands will really help to congest the those muscles with blood, carrying those enzymes to take care of some of that stuff. And that's, of course, what ART is designed to do as well.
It's funny, the nuances of this have profound effects. So I haven't, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was doing very heavy bent over rowing with a T-bar. And I got too wide with my stance. And while I was working, I felt this grinding sensation in my right hip. And a lot of people don't know this unless you have hip problems, but you feel hip problems in your groin. Everybody goes, oh, no, that's your gluteus minimus. It's sore. That's not your hip out here. You can't fall on your hip. It's not on the outside of the body. It's in your groin. It's where the hip, where the hip joint attaches to the pelvis. And so I heard it in my body, this grinding sound. And I probably maybe tore a labrum, but I didn't do anything about it. And I kept training. And so I get occasional pain, but I haven't had this pain in probably 3 years. So I deadlifted the other day. And the reality is I didn't show the deadlift the respect it deserves. And, I went right up to 300 pounds because I used to deadlift 700 pounds. I can do 300. And the next day, my right glute was so sore, and it was sore for 4 days. Of course it was sore because it was like a muscle that never got trained. And then I just pulled 300 pounds. Well, do you know that pain glute made me change the way I walk? That hip injury is hurting me now.
Yeah, because
the body goes back into that splint mode. It pulls everything back in the wrong way, and you. So it really is. It's amazing how the muscles are instinctive, intuitive, and they are constantly adjusting to keep your body out of pain. They really are.
Yeah. If nothing else, we are an adaptive mechanism as humans, right? We're the best adaptive things on this planet. And I think to your point, when you do things that cause a shortening of that muscle fiber, or do things that are associated with resting that muscle fiber, it's going to adapt to that. So you need to reverse that adaptation. What I would say, just to kind of follow up on this conversation, is back to the original point of how this stuff was first introduced. Just a personal anecdote here. I blew out my knee in summer of 2017, and I was doing BFR that same night because everything else was fine except for my knee. So I was doing quad exercises. I was doing calf raises, or leg extensions and calf extensions, and really making sure that I wasn't atrophying as much as possible. So if we can prevent the atrophy in the first place by implementing BFR early on, then we don't have to readjust and readapt to new loads. The other thing I would add is BFR is a really good way, because we're using, in general, relatively light loads. It's a good way to get yourself gradually back to that place that you were before the injury. So, as a rehab tool, I don't think there's a better thing out there. And to your point, we can take peptides, we can take oral supplements and things like that. But just as you mentioned before, I don't think there's a better thing out there for rehabilitation or prevention of injury in the first place.
If you've been thinking about BFR bands, you've heard me talk about them for years, but you just haven't taken the plunge. Step out of your comfort zone and get a pair. And I promise you, you won't be disappointed. You won't look back at buying BFR bands and go, wow, that was a waste of money. No, a lot of the supplements you've bought that made promises, that was a waste of money. But BFR bands work. The science behind them, and a lot of people use them now. I know I've seen on Instagram, Mark Wahlberg uses them. He believes in them. Lots of celebrities use them. I wouldn't be surprised if The Rock uses them. Go to shrnetwork.biz/BStrong, BSTRONG. Use the code SHR15. If you don't want to take the full plunge, just buy the upper arm bands. Watch how fast your up and your triceps. We're not even talking about triceps. Your triceps and your biceps will explode within a couple weeks. You'll look in the mirror and go, "Wow, what are my arms going to look like in a year if I stick with this?" I promise you, you won't feel like you've gotten robbed. This is a legitimate product that truly lives up to the promises. So let me get Timothy Perez says BFR is where it's at. Game changer for sure. People who've used it know. You know that old saying, if you know, you know. Well, if you know, you know. And there's no embarrassment. I've been trying to figure out why more people don't use them. And maybe they feel like, oh, I've got to put these things on. I feel weird wearing these around. You know what? Overcome that. People are stupid. Don't live down to their standards. Live up to your own standards and find the results that you want. It's been right there. You just need to take the plunge. I mean, you will not be disappointed. You will not. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. I never asked this before, but is there any type of money back guarantee on the Be Strong bands?
We do have a 2-year warranty. So if anything goes wrong within that 2 years, you can send them back and we'll work with you. You know, I think we should start implementing a money back guarantee because the return rate on these is extremely low. People just fall in love with them and just start using them for just about everything. So let me get back with my team and let you know.
Okay, that's good. You're going to be on the show again, not too far away. So, look, that's it for today. I've made my plea to help you make progress faster, and they're the Be Strong BFR bands. Get a pair and then tell me what you think of them. Listen, guys, thanks for being here. It's been a great discussion, and anything we've missed, if we've missed any questions, email them to onair@superhumanradio.net, and we will cover them for you. I proceed. Okay. Let's see. I am on the air tomorrow. I was going to say I'm off the air. Oh, we're doing a great show tomorrow. You know, everybody's all about eating fiber. And I have been a staunch opponent of consuming too much fiber. And the results of that was because Leslie Aiello, who used to be the chairperson, ran the Wenner-Gren Foundation in Manhattan. And I had a couple conversations about fiber. And we, from an evolutionary perspective, progressed very quickly when we stopped eating fibrous plants, ironically. And now, you know, everybody wants you to eat more fiber. Well, there's a new study out that shows that fiber is great until it's not. And eating fiber is not a good thing. And it actually can lead to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow on the show. So don't miss it. Don't forget, share the show. You never know who you help. Thank you, Dr. Pete. Thank you, Sten, for being here today. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Carl. You're the man.
Take care.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks. All right. And that's it for today.